Rapid Diorama by Charles Dickens. We are bound for Naples, and we cross the threshold of the eternal city at yonder gate, the gate of San Giovanni Laterano, where the two last objects that attract the notice of a departing visitor, and the two first objects that attract the notice of an arriving one, are a proud church and a decaying ruin, good emblems of Rome. Our way lies over the Campagna, which looks more solemn on a bright blue day like this than beneath a darker sky, the great extent of ruin being plainer to the eye, and the sunshine through the arches of the broken aqueducts, showing other broken arches shining through them in the melancholy distance. When we have traversed it and look back from Albano, its dark, undulating surface lies below us like a stagnant lake, or like a broad, dull lethe flowing round the walls of Rome, and separating it from all the world. How often have the legions, in triumphant march, gone glittering across that purple waste, so silent and unpeopled now? How often has the train of captives looked, with sinking hearts, upon the distant city, and beheld its population pouring out to hail the return of their conqueror? What riot, sensuality, and murder have run mad in the vast palaces now heaps of brick and shattered marble? What glare of fires, and roar of popular tumult, and wail of pestilence and famine, have come sweeping over the wild plain where nothing is now heard but the wind, and where the solitary lizards gambol unmolested in the sun? The train of wine carts going into Rome, each driven by a shaggy peasant reclining beneath a little gypsy-fashioned canopy of sheepskin, is ended now, and we go toiling up into a higher country where there are trees. The next day brings us on the Pontine marshes, wearily flat and lonesome, and overgrown with brushwood and swamped with water, but with a fine road made across them, shaded by a long, long avenue. Here and there we pass a solitary guardhouse. Here and there a hovel, deserted and walled up. Some herdsmen loiter on the banks of the stream beside the road, and sometimes a flat-bottomed boat, towed by a man, comes rippling idly along it. A horseman passes occasionally, carrying a long gun crosswise on the saddle before him and attended by fierce dogs, but there is nothing else astir save the wind and the shadows until we come in sight of Terracina. How blue and bright the sea, rolling below the windows of the inn so famous in robber stories. How picturesque the great crags and points of rock overhanging tomorrow's narrow road, where galley slaves are working in the quarries above, and the sentinels who guard them lounge on the seashore. All night there is the murmur of the sea beneath the stars, and in the morning, just at daybreak, the prospect suddenly becoming expanded, as if by a miracle, reveals, in the far distance across the sea there, Naples with its islands and Vesuvius spouting fire. Within a quarter of an hour, the whole is gone as if it were a vision in the clouds, and there is nothing but the sea and sky. The Neapolitan frontier crossed, after 2 hours' traveling, and the hungriest of soldiers and custom-house officers with difficulty appeased, we enter, by a gateless portal, into the first Neapolitan town, Fondi. Take note of Fondi, in the name of all that is wretched and beggarly. A filthy channel of mud and refuse meanders down the center of the miserable streets, fed by obscene rivulets that trickle from the abject houses. There is not a door, a window, or a shutter, not a roof, a wall, a post, or a pillar in all Fondi, but is decayed and crazy and rotting away. The wretched history of the town, with all its sieges and pillages by Barbarossa and the rest, might have been acted last year. How the gaunt dogs that sneak about the miserable streets, come to be alive and undevoured by the people, is one of the enigmas of the world. A hollow-cheeked and scowling people they are, all beggars, but that's nothing. Look at them as they gather round. Some are too indolent to come downstairs, or are too wisely mistrustful of the stairs, perhaps, to venture. So stretch out their lean hands from upper windows and howl. Others come flocking about us, fighting and jostling one another, and demanding, incessantly, charity for the love of God, charity for the love of the Blessed Virgin, charity for the love of all the saints. A group of miserable children, almost naked, screaming forth the same petition, discover that they can see themselves reflected in the varnish of the carriage, and begin to dance and make grimaces, that they may have the pleasure of seeing their antics repeated in this mirror. A crippled idiot, in the act of striking one of them who drowns his clamorous demand for charity, observes his angry counterpart in the panel, stops short, and thrusting out his tongue, begins to wag his head and chatter. The shrill cry raised at this awakens half a dozen wild creatures wrapped in frowsy brown cloaks who are lying on the church steps with pots and pans for sale. These, scrambling up, approach and beg defiantly. "I am hungry. Give me something. Listen to me, signor. I am hungry." Then, a ghastly old woman, fearful of being too late, comes hobbling down the street, stretching out one hand and scratching herself all the way with the other, and screaming, long before she can be heard, "Charity, charity." I'll go and pray for you directly, beautiful lady, if you'll give me charity. Lastly, the members of a brotherhood for burying the dead. Hideously masked and attired in shabby black robes, white at the skirts with the splashes of many muddy winters, escorted by a dirty priest and a congenial cross-bearer, come hurrying past. Surrounded by this motley concourse, we move out of Fondi. Bad bright eyes glaring at us, out of the darkness of every crazy tenement, like glistening fragments of its filth and putrefaction. A noble mountain pass, with the ruins of a fort on a strong eminence, traditionally called the Fort of Fra Diavolo. The old town of Itri, like a device in pastry, built up almost perpendicularly on a hill and approached by long, steep flights of steps. Beautiful Mola di Gata, whose wines, like those of Albano, have degenerated since the days of Horace, or his taste for wine was bad. Which is not likely of one who enjoyed it so much and extolled it so well. Another night, upon the road at St. Agatha, a rest next day at Capua, which is picturesque but hardly so seductive to a traveler now, as the soldiers of Praetorian Rome were wont to find the ancient city of that name, a flat road among vines festooned and looped from tree to tree, and Mount Vesuvius close at hand at last. Its cone and summit whitened with snow, and its smoke hanging over it in the heavy atmosphere of the day like a dense cloud. So we go, rattling downhill into Naples. A funeral is coming up the street towards us. The body, on an open bier borne on a kind of palanquin, covered with a gay cloth of crimson and gold. The mourners in white gowns and masks. If there be death abroad, life is well represented too, for all Naples would seem to be out of doors, and tearing to and fro in carriages. Some of these, the common Vetturino vehicles, are drawn by 3 horses abreast, decked with smart trappings and great abundance of brazen ornament, and always going very fast, not that their loads are light. For the smallest of them has at least 6 people inside, 4 in front, 4 or 5 more hanging on behind, and 2 or 3 more in a net or bag below the axle-tree, where they lie half suffocated with mud and dust. Exhibitors of punch, buffo singers with guitars, reciters of poetry, reciters of stories, a row of cheap exhibitions with clowns and showmen, drums and trumpets, painted cloths representing the wonders within, and admiring crowds assembled without, assist the whirl and bustle. Ragged lazzaroni lie asleep in doorways, archways, and kennels. The gentry, gaily dressed, are dashing up and down in carriages on the Chiaji, or walking in the public gardens. And quiet letter writers, perched behind their little desks and inkstands under the portico of the great theatre of San Carlo, in the public street, are waiting for clients. Here is a galley slave in chains, who wants a letter written to a friend. He approaches a clerkly-looking man, sitting under the corner arch, and makes his bargain. He has obtained permission of the sentinel who guards him, who stands near, leaning against the wall and cracking nuts. The galley slave dictates in the ear of the letter writer what he desires to say, and as he can't read writing, looks intently in his face to read there whether he sets down faithfully what he is told. After a time, the galley slave becomes discursive, incoherent. The secretary pauses and rubs his chin. The galley slave is voluble and energetic. The secretary at length catches the idea and with the air of a man who knows how to word it sets it down, stopping, now and then, to glance back at his text admiringly. The galley slave is silent. The soldier stoically cracks his nuts. Is there anything more to say? Inquires the letter writer. No more. Then listen, friend of mine, he reads it through. The galley slave is quite enchanted. It is folded and addressed and given to him, and he pays the fee. The secretary falls back indolently in his chair and takes a book. The galley slave gathers up an empty sack. The sentinel throws away a handful of nutshells, shoulders his musket, and away they go together. Why do the beggars rap their chins constantly, with their right hands, when you look at them? Everything is done in pantomime in Naples, and that is the conventional sign for hunger. A man who is quarreling with another yonder lays the palm of his right hand on the back of his left and shakes the 2 thumbs, expressive of a donkey's ears, whereat his adversary is goaded to desperation. 2 people bargaining for fish, the buyer empties an imaginary waistcoat pocket when he is told the price, and walks away without a word, having thoroughly conveyed to the seller that he considers it too dear. 2 people in carriages meeting, one touches his lips twice or thrice, holding up the 5 fingers of his right hand, and gives a horizontal cut in the air with the palm. The other nods briskly and goes his way. He has been invited to a friendly dinner at 5:30 and will certainly come. All over Italy, a peculiar shake of the right hand from the wrist, with the forefinger stretched out, expresses a negative, the only negative beggars will ever understand. But in Naples, those 5 fingers are a copious language. All this and every other kind of outdoor life and stir, and macaroni eating at sunset, and flower selling all day long, and begging and stealing everywhere and at all hours, you see upon the bright seashore. where the waves of the bay sparkle merrily. But, lovers and hunters of the picturesque, let us not keep too studiously out of view the miserable depravity, degradation, and wretchedness with which this gay Neapolitan life is inseparably associated. It is not well to find St. Giles's so repulsive, and the Porta Capuana so attractive. A pair of naked legs and a ragged red scarf do not make all the difference between what is interesting and what is coarse and odious. Painting and poetizing forever, if you will, the beauties of this most beautiful and lovely spot of earth, let us, as our duty, try to associate a new picturesque with some faint recognition of man's destiny and capabilities. More hopeful, I believe, among the ice and snow of the North Pole than in the sun and bloom of Naples. Capri, once made odious by the deified beast Tiberius, Ischia, Procida, and the thousand distant beauties of the bay, lie in the blue sea yonder, changing in the mist and sunshine 20 times a day, now close at hand, now far off, now unseen. The fairest country in the world is spread about us. Whether we turn towards the Messino shore of the splendid watery amphitheater, and go by the grotto of Posilippo to the grotto del Cane, and away to Baiae, or take the other way, towards Vesuvius and Sorrento, it is one succession of delights. In the last named direction, where, over doors and archways, there are countless little images of San Gennaro, with his canute's hand stretched out, to check the fury of the burning mountain, we are carried pleasantly, by a railroad on the beautiful sea beach, past the town of Torre del Greco, built upon the ashes of the former town destroyed by an eruption of Vesuvius, within 100 years, and past the flat-roofed houses, granaries, and macaroni manufactories, to Castellamare, with its ruined castle, now inhabited by fishermen, standing in the sea upon a heap of rocks. Here the railroad terminates, but hence we may ride on by an unbroken succession of enchanting bays and beautiful scenery, sloping from the highest summit of St. Angelo, the highest neighboring mountain, down to the water's edge, among vineyards, olive trees, gardens of oranges and lemons, orchards, heaped-up rocks, green gorges in the hills, and by the bases of snow-covered heights and through small towns with handsome, dark-haired women at the doors, and past delicious summer villas, to Sorrento, where the poet Tasso drew his inspiration from the beauty surrounding him. Returning, we may climb the heights above Castellamare, and looking down among the boughs and leaves, see the crisp water glistening in the sun, and clusters of white houses in distant Naples, dwindling in the great extent of prospect down to Dice. The coming back to the city by the beach again at sunset, with the glowing sea on one side and the darkening mountain with its smoke and flame upon the other, is a sublime conclusion to the glory of the day. That church by the Porta Capuana, near the old fisher market in the dirtiest quarter of dirty Naples, where the revolt of Masaniello began, is memorable for having been the scene of one of his earliest proclamations to the people, and is particularly remarkable for nothing else, unless it be its waxen and bejeweled saint in a glass case, with two odd hands, or the enormous number of beggars who are constantly rapping their chins there, like a battery of castanets. The cathedral with the beautiful door, and the columns of African and Egyptian granite that once ornamented the temple of Apollo, contains the famous sacred blood of San Gennaro or Januarius, which is preserved in 2 phials in a silver tabernacle and miraculously liquefies 3 times a year, to the great admiration of the people. At the same moment, the stone, distant some miles, where the saint suffered martyrdom, becomes faintly red. It is said that the officiating priests turn faintly red also, sometimes, when these miracles occur. The old men who live in hovels at the entrance of these ancient catacombs, and who, in their age and infirmity, seem waiting here to be buried themselves, are members of a curious body, called the Royal Hospital, who are the official attendants at funerals. 2 of these old specters totter away with lighted tapers to show the caverns of death, as unconcerned as if they were immortal. They were used as burying places for 300 years, and in one part is a large pit full of skulls and bones, said to be the sad remains of a great mortality occasioned by a plague. In the rest there is nothing but dust. They consist chiefly of great wide corridors and labyrinths, hewn out of the rock. At the end of some of these long passages are unexpected glimpses of the daylight shining down from above. It looks as ghastly and as strange, among the torches and the dust and the dark vaults, as if it too were dead and buried. The present burial place lies out yonder, on a hill between the city and Vesuvius. The old Campo Santo with its 365 pits is only used for those who die in hospitals and prisons and are unclaimed by their friends. The graceful new cemetery, at no great distance from it, though yet unfinished, has already many graves among its shrubs and flowers, and airy colonnades. It might be reasonably objected elsewhere that some of the tombs are meretricious and too fanciful, but the general brightness seems to justify it here, and Mount Vesuvius, separated from them by a lovely slope of ground, exalts and saddens the scene. If it be solemn to behold from this new city of the dead, with its dark smoke hanging in the clear sky, how much more awful and impressive is it, viewed from the ghostly ruins of Herculaneum and Pompeii. Stand at the bottom of the great marketplace of Pompeii, and look up the silent streets, through the ruined temples of Jupiter and Isis, over the broken houses with their inmost sanctuaries open to the day, away to Mount Vesuvius, bright and snowy in the peaceful distance, and lose all count of time, and heed of other things, in the strange and melancholy sensation of seeing the destroyed and the destroyer making this quiet picture in the sun. Then ramble on and see, at every turn, the little familiar tokens of human habitation and everyday pursuits. The chafing of the bucketrope in the stone rim of the exhausted well, the track of carriage wheels in the pavement of the street, the marks of drinking vessels on the stone counter of the wine shop, the amphor A in private cellars, stored away so many hundred years ago and undisturbed to this hour, all rendering the solitude and deadly lonesomeness of the place 10,000 times more solemn than if the volcano in its fury had swept the city from the earth and sunk it in the bottom of the sea. After it was shaken by the earthquake which preceded the eruption, workmen were employed in shaping out, in stone, new ornaments for temples and other buildings that had suffered. Here lies their work, outside the city gate, as if they would return tomorrow. In the cellar of Diome's house, where certain skeletons were found huddled together, close to the door, the impression of their bodies on the ashes hardened with the ashes and became stamped and fixed there, after they had shrunk inside to scanty bones. So, in the theater of Herculaneum, a comic mask, floating on the stream when it was hot and liquid, stamped its mimic features in it as it hardened into stone. And now, it turns upon the stranger the fantastic look it turned upon the audiences in that same theater 2,000 years ago. Next to the wonder of going up and down the streets, and in and out of the houses, and traversing the secret chambers of the temples of a religion that has vanished from the earth, and finding so many fresh traces of remote antiquity, as if the course of time had been stopped. After this desolation, and there had been no nights and days, months, years, and centuries since, nothing is more impressive and terrible than the many evidences of the searching nature of the ashes, as bespeaking their irresistible power and the impossibility of escaping them. In the wine cellars, they forced their way into the earthen vessels, displacing the wine and choking them, to the brim, with dust. In the tombs, they forced the ashes of the dead from the funeral urns and rained new ruin even into them. The mouths and eyes and skulls of all the skeletons were stuffed with this terrible hail. In Herculaneum, where the flood was of a different and a heavier kind, it rolled in like a sea. Imagine a deluge of water turned to marble at its height, and that is what is called the lava here. Some workmen were digging the gloomy well on the brink of which we now stand, looking down, when they came on some of the stone benches of the theater. Those steps, for such they seem, at the bottom of the excavation, and found the buried city of Herculaneum. Presently going down, with lighted torches, we are perplexed by great walls of monstrous thickness, rising up between the benches, shutting out the stage, obtruding their shapeless forms in absurd places, confusing the whole plan, and making it a disordered dream. We cannot, at first, believe or picture to ourselves that this came rolling in and drowned the city, and that all that is not here has been cut away by the axe like solid stone. But this perceived and understood, the horror and oppression of its presence are indescribable. Many of the paintings on the walls in the roofless chambers of both cities, or carefully removed to the museum at Naples, are as fresh and plain as if they had been executed yesterday. Here are subjects of still life, as provisions, dead game, bottles, glasses, and the like, familiar classical stories or mythological fables always forcibly and plainly told. Conceits of cupids quarreling, sporting, working at trades, theatrical rehearsals, poets reading their productions to their friends, inscriptions chalked upon the walls, political squibs, advertisements, rough drawings by schoolboys, everything to people, and restore the ancient cities in the fancy of their wondering visitor. Furniture, too, you see of every kind: lamps, tables, couches, vessels for eating, drinking, and cooking, workmen's tools, surgical instruments, tickets for the theater, pieces of money, personal ornaments, bunches of keys found clenched in the grasp of skeletons, helmets of guards and warriors, little household bells, yet musical with their old domestic tones. The least among these objects lends its aid to swell the interest of Vesuvius and invest it with a perfect fascination. The looking from either ruined city into the neighboring grounds overgrown with beautiful vines and luxuriant trees, and remembering that house upon house, temple on temple, building after building, and street after street are still lying underneath the roots of all the quiet. Cultivation, waiting to be turned up to the light of day, is something so wonderful, so full of mystery, so captivating to the imagination that one would think it would be paramount and yield to nothing else. To nothing but Vesuvius, but the mountain is the genius of the scene. From every indication of the ruin it has worked, we look, again, with an absorbing interest to where its smoke is rising up into the sky. It is beyond us as we thread the ruined streets. Above us, as we stand upon the ruined walls, we follow it through every vista of broken columns, as we wander through the empty courtyards of the houses, and through the garlandings and interlacings of every wanton vine, turning away to Piastum yonder, to see the awful structures built, the least aged of them, hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, and standing yet erect in lonely majesty upon the wild malaria-blighted plain. We watch Vesuvius as it disappears from the prospect, and watch for it again on our return with the same thrill of interest, as the doom and destiny of all this beautiful country, biding its terrible time. It is very warm in the sun on this early spring day when we return from Piastum, but very cold in the shade, insomuch that although we may lunch pleasantly at noon in the open air by the gate of Pompeii, the neighboring rivulet supplies thick ice for our wine. But the sun is shining brightly. There is not a cloud or speck of vapor in the whole blue sky, looking down upon the Bay of Naples, and the moon will be at the full tonight. No matter that the snow and ice lie thick upon the summit of Vesuvius, or that we have been on foot all day at Pompeii, or that croakers maintain that strangers should not be on the mountain by night in such an unusual season. Let us take advantage of the fine weather, make the best of our way to Ricina, the little village at the foot of the mountain, prepare ourselves as well as we can on so short a notice at the guide's house, ascend at once and have sunset halfway up, moonlight at the top, and midnight to come down in. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there is a terrible uproar in the little stable-yard of Signor Salvator, the recognized head guide, with the gold band round his cap, and 30 underguides who are all scuffling and screaming at once, are preparing half a dozen saddled ponies, 3 litters, and some stout staves for the journey. Every one of the 30 quarrels with the other 29 and frightens the 6 ponies, and as much of the village as can possibly squeeze itself into the little stable-yard participates in the tumult and gets trodden on by the cattle. After much violent skirmishing, and more noise than would suffice for the storming of Naples, the procession starts. The head guide, who is liberally paid for all the attendants, rides a little in advance of the party. The other 30 guides proceed on foot. 8 go forward with the litters that are to be used by and by, and the remaining 22 beg. We ascend, gradually, by stony lanes like rough broad flights of stairs for some time. At length, we leave these and the vineyards on either side of them, and emerge upon a bleak bare region where the lava lies confusedly, in enormous rusty masses, as if the earth had been plowed up by burning thunderbolts. And now we halt to see the sun set. The change that falls upon the dreary region, and on the whole mountain as its red light fades, and the night comes on, and the unutterable solemnity and dreariness that reign around, who that has witnessed it can ever forget? It is dark when, after winding, for some time, over the broken ground, we arrive at the foot of the cone, which is extremely steep and seems to rise almost perpendicularly from the spot where we dismount. The only light is reflected from the snow, deep, hard, and white, with which the cone is covered. It is now intensely cold and the air is piercing. The 31 have brought no torches, knowing that the moon will rise before we reach the top. 2 of the litters are devoted to the 2 ladies, the third to a rather heavy gentleman from Naples, whose hospitality and good nature have attached him to the expedition and determined him to assist in doing the honors of the mountain. The rather heavy gentleman is carried by 15 men, each of the ladies by half a dozen. We who walk make the best use of our staves, and so the whole party begin to labor upward over the snow, as if they were toiling to the summit of an antediluvian 12th cake. We are a long time toiling up, and the head guide looks oddly about him when one of the company, not an Italian, though an habitué of the mountain for many years, whom we will call, for our present purpose, Mr. Pickle of Portici, suggests that, as it is freezing hard and the usual footing of ashes is covered by the snow and ice, it will surely be difficult to descend. But the sight of the litters above, tilting up and down and jerking from this side to that, as the bearers continually slip and tumble, diverts our attention, more especially as the whole length of the rather heavy gentleman is, at that moment, presented to us alarmingly foreshortened, with his head downwards. The rising of the moon soon afterwards revives the flagging spirits of the bearers. Stimulating each other with their usual watchword, "Courage, friend, it is to eat macaroni," they press on gallantly for the summit. From tinging the top of the snow above us with a band of light and pouring it in a stream through the valley below, while we have been ascending in the dark, the moon soon lights the whole white mountainside, and the broad sea down below, and tiny Naples in the distance, and every village in the country round. The whole prospect is in this lovely state when we come upon the platform on the mountain top, the region of fire, an exhausted crater formed of great masses of gigantic cinders, like blocks of stone from some tremendous waterfall, burnt up, from every chink and crevice of which hot, sulphurous smoke is pouring out, while from another, conical-shaped hill, the present crater, rising abruptly from this platform at the end, great sheets of fire are streaming forth, reddening the night with flame, blackening it with smoke, and spotting it with red-hot stones and cinders that fly up into the air like feathers and fall down like lead. What words can paint the gloom and grandeur of this scene? The broken ground, the smoke, the sense of suffocation from the sulfur, the fear of falling down through the crevices in the yawning ground, the stopping every now and then for somebody who is missing in the dark, for the dense smoke now obscures the moon, the intolerable noise of the 30, and the hoarse roaring of the mountain, make it a scene of such confusion at the same time that we reel again. But dragging the ladies through it, and across another exhausted crater to the foot of the present volcano, we approach close to it on the windy side, and then sit down among the hot ashes at its foot and look up in silence, faintly estimating the action that is going on within, from its being full 100 feet higher at this minute than it was 6 weeks ago. There is something in the fire and roar that generates an irresistible desire to get nearer to it. We cannot rest long without starting off, two of us, on our hands and knees, accompanied by the head guide, to climb to the brim of the flaming crater and try to look in. Meanwhile, the 30 yell as with one voice that it is a dangerous proceeding and call to us to come back, frightening the rest of the party out of their wits. What with their noise, and what with the trembling of the thin crust of ground, that seems about to open underneath our feet and plunge us in the burning gulf below, which is the real danger if there be any. And what with the flashing of the fire in our faces, and the shower of red-hot ashes that is raining down, and the choking smoke and sulfur, we may well feel giddy and irrational like drunken men. But we contrive to climb up to the brim and look down for a moment into the hell of boiling fire below. Then we all three come rolling down, blackened and singed and scorched and hot and giddy, and each with his dress alight in half a dozen places. You have read 1,000 times that the usual way of descending is by sliding down the ashes, which, forming a gradually increasing ledge below the feet, prevent too rapid a descent. But when we have crossed the two exhausted craters on our way back and are come to this precipitous place, there is, as Mr. Pickle has foretold, no vestige of ashes to be seen, the whole being a smooth sheet of ice. In this dilemma, 10 or a dozen of the guides cautiously join hands and make a chain of men, of whom the foremost beat, as well as they can, a rough track with their sticks, down which we prepare to follow. The way being fearfully steep, and none of the party, even of the 30, being able to keep their feet for 6 paces together, the ladies are taken out of their litters and placed, each between two careful persons, while others of the 30 hold by their skirts to prevent their falling forward, a necessary precaution, tending to the immediate and hopeless dilapidation of their apparel. The rather heavy gentleman is abjured to leave his litter too, and be escorted in a similar manner. But he resolves to be brought down as he was brought up, on the principle that his 15 bearers are not likely to tumble all at once, and that he is safer so than trusting to his own legs. In this order we begin the descent, sometimes on foot, sometimes shuffling on the ice, always proceeding much more quietly and slowly than on our upward way, and constantly alarmed by the falling among us of somebody from behind, who endangers the footing of the whole party and clings pertinaciously to anybody's ankles. It is impossible for the litter to be in advance, too, as the track has to be made, and its appearance behind us overhead, with some one or other of the bearers always down, and the rather heavy gentleman with his legs always in the air, is very threatening and frightful. We have gone on thus a very little way, painfully and anxiously, but quite merrily, and regarding it as a great success, and have all fallen several times, and have all been stopped somehow or other as we were sliding away, when Mr. Pickle of Portishead, in the act of remarking on these uncommon circumstances as quite beyond his experience, stumbles, falls, disengages himself, with quick presence of mind from those about him, plunges away head foremost, and rolls over and over down the whole surface of the cone. Sickening as it is to look and be so powerless to help him, I see him there in the moonlight. I have had such a dream often, skimming over the white ice like a cannonball. Almost at the same moment, there is a cry from behind, and a man who has carried a light basket of spare cloaks on his head comes rolling past, at the same frightful speed, closely followed by a boy. At this climax of the chapter of accidents, the remaining A1020 vociferate to that degree that a pack of wolves would be music to them. Giddy and bloody and a mere bundle of rags, is Pickle of Portici when we reach the place where we dismounted, and where the horses are waiting. But, thank God, sound in limb, and never are we likely to be more glad to see a man alive and on his feet than to see him now, making light of it too, though sorely bruised and in great pain. The boy is brought into the hermitage on the mountain, while we are at supper with his head tied up, and the man is heard of some hours afterwards. He too is bruised and stunned, but has broken no bones, the snow having, fortunately, covered all the larger blocks of rock and stone and rendered them harmless. After a cheerful meal and a good rest before a blazing fire, we again take horse and continue our descent to Salvator's house, very slowly, by reason of our bruised friend being hardly able to keep the saddle or endure the pain of motion. Though it is so late at night or early in the morning, all the people of the village are waiting about the little stable-yard when we arrive, and looking up the road by which we are expected. Our appearance is hailed with a great clamor of tongues, and a general sensation for which in our modesty we are somewhat at a loss to account. Until, turning into the yard, we find that one of a party of French gentlemen who were on the mountain at the same time is lying on some straw in the stable, with a broken limb, looking like death and suffering great torture, and that we were confidently supposed to have encountered some worse accident. So well returned, and heaven be praised. As the cheerful Vettorino, who has borne us company all the way from Pisa, says with all his heart, and away with his ready horses into sleeping Naples. It wakes again to Policinelli and pickpockets, buffo singers and beggars, rags, puppets, flowers, brightness, dirt, and universal degradation, airing its harlequin suit in the sunshine, next day and every day, singing, starving, dancing, gaming on the seashore, and leaving all labor to the burning mountain, which is ever at its work. Our English dilettanti would be very pathetic on the subject of the national taste, if they could hear an Italian opera half as badly sung in England as we may hear the Foscari performed, tonight, in the splendid theatre of San Carlo. But for astonishing truth and spirit in seizing and embodying the real life about it, the shabby little San Carlino theatre, the rickety house 1 story high, with a staring picture outside, down among the drums and trumpets and the tumblers and the lady conjurer, is without a rival anywhere. There is one extraordinary feature in the real life of Naples, at which we may take a glance before we go, the lotteries. They prevail in most parts of Italy, but are particularly obvious in their effects and influences here. They are drawn every Saturday. They bring an immense revenue to the government and diffuse a taste for gambling among the poorest of the poor, which is very comfortable to the coffers of the state and very ruinous to themselves. The lowest stake is 1 grain, less than a farthing. 100 numbers from 1 to 100 inclusive are put into a box. 5 are drawn. Those are the prizes. I buy 3 numbers. If one of them come up, I win a small prize. If 2, some hundreds of times my stake. If 3, 3,500 times my stake. I stake, or play as they call it, what I can upon my numbers and buy what numbers I please. The amount I play, I pay at the lottery office where I purchase the ticket, and it is stated on the ticket itself. Every lottery office keeps a printed book, an universal lottery diviner, where every possible accident and circumstance is provided for and has a number against it. For instance, let us take 2 Carlini about 7 pence. On our way to the lottery office, we run against a black man. When we get there, we say gravely, the diviner. It is handed over the counter as a serious matter of business. We look at black man, such a number, give us that. We look at running against a person in the street, give us that. We look at the name of the street itself, give us that. Now we have our 3 numbers. If the roof of the theatre of San Carlo were to fall in, so many people would play upon the numbers attached to such an accident in the diviner, that the government would soon close those numbers, and decline to run the risk of losing any more upon them. This often happens. Not long ago, when there was a fire in the king's palace, there was such a desperate run on fire, and king and palace, that further stakes on the numbers attached to those words in the Golden Book were forbidden. Every accident or event is supposed by the ignorant populace to be a revelation to the beholder or party concerned in connection with the lottery. Certain people who have a talent for dreaming fortunately are much sought after, and there are some priests who are constantly favored with visions of the lucky numbers. I heard of a horse running away with a man and dashing him down, dead, at the corner of a street. Pursuing the horse with incredible speed was another man who ran so fast that he came up immediately after the accident. He threw himself upon his knees beside the unfortunate rider and clasped his hand with an expression of the wildest grief. "If you have life," he said, "speak one word to me. If you have one gasp of breath left, mention your age for heaven's sake, that I may play that number in the lottery." It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we may go to see our lottery drawn. The ceremony takes place every Saturday in the tribunal or court of justice. This singular, earthy-smelling room or gallery, as moldy as an old cellar and as damp as a dungeon. At the upper end is a platform with a large horseshoe table upon it, and a president and council sitting round, all judges of the law. The man on the little stool behind the president is the capo lazarone, a kind of tribune of the people, appointed on their behalf to see that all is fairly conducted, attended by a few personal friends. A ragged, swarthy fellow he is, with long matted hair hanging down all over his face, and covered from head to foot with most unquestionably genuine dirt. All the body of the room is filled with the commonest of the Neapolitan people, and between them and the platform, guarding the steps leading to the ladder, is a small body of soldiers. There is some delay in the arrival of the necessary number of judges, during which the box in which the numbers are being placed is a source of the deepest interest. When the box is full, the boy who is to draw the numbers out of it becomes the prominent feature of the proceedings. He is already dressed for his part, in a tight brown holland coat, with only one, the left, sleeve to it, which leaves his right arm bared to the shoulder, ready for plunging down into the mysterious chest. During the hush and whisper that pervade the room, all eyes are turned on this young minister of fortune. People begin to inquire his age with a view to the next lottery, and the number of his brothers and sisters, and the age of his father and mother, and whether he has any moles or pimples upon him, and where and how many, when the arrival of the last judge but one, a little old man, universally dreaded as possessing the evil eye, makes a slight diversion, and would occasion a greater one, but that he is immediately deposed as a source of interest by the officiating priest, who advances gravely to his place, followed by a very dirty little boy, carrying his sacred vestments and a pot of holy water. Here is the last judge come at last, and now he takes his place at the horseshoe table. There is a murmur of irrepressible agitation. In the midst of it, the priest puts his head into the sacred vestments and pulls the same over his shoulders. Then he says a silent prayer, and dipping a brush into the pot of holy water, sprinkles it over the box and over the boy, and gives them a double-barreled blessing, which the box and the boy are both hoisted on the table to receive. The boy remaining on the table, the box is now carried round the front of the platform by an attendant who holds it up and shakes it lustily all the time, seeming to say, like the conjurer, "There is no deception, ladies and gentlemen, keep your eyes upon me if you please." At last the box is set before the boy, and the boy, first holding up his naked arm and open hand, dives down into the hole, it is made like a ballot box, and pulls out a number which is rolled up round something hard like a bonbon. This he hands to the judge next him, who unrolls a little bit and hands it to the president, next to whom he sits. The president unrolls it very slowly. The capo lazarone leans over his shoulder. The president holds it up unrolled to the capo lazarone. The capo lazarone, looking at it eagerly, cries out in a shrill, loud voice, "Sessantadu?" 62, expressing the two upon his fingers as he calls it out. Alas, the capo lazarone himself has not staked on 62. His face is very long and his eyes roll wildly. As it happens to be a favorite number, however, it is pretty well received, which is not always the case. They are all drawn with the same ceremony, omitting the blessing. One blessing is enough for the whole multiplication table. The only new incident in the proceedings is the gradually deepening intensity of the change in the Cape Lazarone, who has, evidently, speculated to the very utmost extent of his means, and who, when he sees the last number and finds that it is not one of his, clasps his hands and raises his eyes to the ceiling before proclaiming it, as though remonstrating, in a secret agony, with his patron saint, for having committed so gross a breach of confidence. I hope the capo lazarone may not desert him for some other member of the calendar, but he seems to threaten it. Where the winners may be, nobody knows. They certainly are not present, the general disappointment filling one with pity for the poor people. They look, when we stand aside, observing them in their passage through the courtyard down below, as miserable as the prisoners in the jail, it forms a part of the building, who are peeping down upon them from between their bars, or as the fragments of human heads which are still dangling in chains outside, in memory of the good old times, when their owners were strung up there for the popular edification. Away from Naples in a glorious sunrise, by the road to Capua, and then on a 3 days' journey along by roads, that we may see, on the way, the monastery of Monte Cassino, which is perched on the steep and lofty hill above the little town of San Germano, and is lost on a misty morning in the clouds. So much the better for the deep sounding of its bell, which, as we go winding up on mules towards the convent, is heard mysteriously in the still air, while nothing is seen but the grey mist, moving solemnly and slowly like a funeral procession. Behold at length the shadowy pile of building close before us, its grey walls and towers dimly seen, though so near and so vast, and the raw vapor rolling through its cloisters heavily. There are two black shadows walking to and fro in the quadrangle, near the statues of the patron saint and his sister, and hopping on behind them, in and out of the old arches, is a raven, croaking in answer to the bell, and uttering, at intervals, the purest Tuscan. How like a Jesuit he looks! There never was a sly and stealthy fellow so at home as is this raven, standing now at the refectory door, with his head on one side, and pretending to glance another way, while he is scrutinizing the visitors keenly, and listening with fixed attention. What a dull-headed monk the porter becomes in comparison. He speaks like us, says the porter, quite as plainly. Quite as plainly, porter. Nothing could be more expressive than his reception of the peasants who are entering the gate with baskets and burdens. There is a roll in his eye and a chuckle in his throat which should qualify him to be chosen superior of an order of ravens. He knows all about it. It's all right, he says. We know what we know. Come along, good people. Glad to see you. How was this extraordinary structure ever built in such a situation, where the labor of conveying the stone and iron and marble, so great a height, must have been prodigious? Caw, says the raven, welcoming the peasants. How, being despoiled by plunder, fire, and earthquake, has it risen from its ruins, and been again made what we now see it, with its church so sumptuous and magnificent? Caw, says the raven, welcoming the peasants. These people have a miserable appearance, and as usual are densely ignorant, and all beg, while the monks are chaunting in the chapel. Caw, says the raven, cuckoo. So we leave him, chuckling and rolling his eye at the convent gate, and wind slowly down again through the cloud. At last emerging from it, we come in sight of the village far below, and the flat green country intersected by rivulets, which is pleasant and fresh to see after the obscurity and haze of the convent. No disrespect to the raven or the holy friars. Away we go again, by muddy roads, and through the most shattered and tattered of villages, where there is not a whole window among all the houses, or a whole garment among all the peasants, or the least appearance of anything to eat, in any of the wretched hucksters' shops. The women wear a bright red bodice laced before and behind, a white skirt, and the Neapolitan headdress of square folds of linen, primitively meant to carry loads on. The men and children wear anything they can get. The soldiers are as dirty and rapacious as the dogs. The inns are such hobgoblin places that they are infinitely more attractive and amusing than the best hotels in Paris. Here is one near Valmontone, that is Valmontone the Round, walled town on the mount opposite, which is approached by a quagmire almost knee-deep. There is a wild colonnade below, and a dark yard full of empty stables and lofts, and a great long kitchen with a great long bench and a great long form, where a party of travelers, with two priests among them, are crowding round the fire while their supper is cooking. Above stairs is a rough brick gallery to sit in, with very little windows with very small patches of knotty glass in them, and all the doors that open from it, a dozen or two off their hinges, and a bare board on trestles for a table, at which 30 people might dine easily, and a fireplace large enough in itself for a breakfast parlor, where, as the faggots blaze and crackle, they illuminate the ugliest and grimmest of faces, drawn in charcoal on the whitewashed chimney sides by previous travelers. There is a flaring country lamp on the table, and, hovering about it, scratching her thick black hair continually, a yellow dwarf of a woman, who stands on tiptoe to arrange the hatchet knives, and takes a flying leap to look into the water jug. The beds in the adjoining rooms are of the liveliest kind. There is not a solitary scrap of looking-glass in the house, and the washing apparatus is identical with the cooking utensils. But the yellow dwarf sets on the table a good flask of excellent wine, holding a quart at least, and produces, among half a dozen other dishes, 2/3 of a roasted kid, smoking hot. She is as good-humored, too, as dirty, which is saying a great deal. So here's long life to her, in the flask of wine, and prosperity to the establishment. Rome gained and left behind, and with it the pilgrims who are now repairing to their own homes again, each with his scallop shell and staff, and soliciting alms for the love of God. We come, by a fair country, to the falls of Terney, where the whole Velino River dashes headlong from a rocky height, amidst shining spray and rainbows. Perugia, strongly fortified by art and nature, on a lofty eminence, rising abruptly from the plain where purple mountains mingle with the distant sky, is glowing, on its market day, with radiant colors. They set off its somber but rich Gothic buildings admirably. The pavement of its marketplace is strewn with country goods. All along the steep hill leading from the town, under the town wall, there is a noisy fair of calves, lambs, pigs, horses, mules, and oxen. Fowls, geese, and turkeys flutter vigorously among their very hoofs, and buyers, sellers, and spectators, clustering everywhere, block up the road as we come shouting down upon them. Suddenly, there is a ringing sound among our horses. The driver stops them. Sinking in his saddle and casting up his eyes to heaven, he delivers this apostrophe, O Jove omnipotent, here is a horse has lost his shoe. Notwithstanding the tremendous nature of this accident, and the utterly forlorn look and gesture, impossible in anyone but an Italian vetturino, with which it is announced, it is not long in being repaired by a mortal farrier, by whose assistance we reach Castiglione the same night, and Arezzo next day. Mass is, of course, performing in its fine cathedral, where the sun shines in among the clustered pillars, through rich stained glass windows, half revealing, half concealing the kneeling figures on the pavement, and striking out paths of spotted light in the long aisles. But how much beauty of another kind is here, when, on a fair clear morning, we look from the summit of a hill on Florence. See where it lies before us in a sun-lighted valley, bright with the winding Arno and shut in by swelling hills, its domes and towers and palaces rising from the rich country in a glittering heap and shining in the sun like gold. Magnificently stern and somber are the streets of beautiful Florence, and the strong old piles of building make such heaps of shadow, on the ground and in the river, that there is another and a different city of rich forms and fancies, always lying at our feet. Prodigious palaces, constructed for defense, with small distrustful windows heavily barred, and walls of great thickness formed of huge masses of rough stone, frown, in their old sulky state, on every street. In the midst of the city, in the piazza of the Grand Duke, adorned with beautiful statues and the fountain of Neptune, rises the Palazzo Vecchio, with its enormous overhanging battlements, and the great tower that watches over the whole town. In its courtyard, worthy of the castle of Otranto in its ponderous gloom, is a massive staircase that the heaviest wagon and the stoutest team of horses might be driven up. Within it is a great saloon, faded and tarnished in its stately decorations, and moldering by grains, but recording yet, in pictures on its walls, the triumphs of the Medici and the wars of the old Florentine people. The prison is hard by, in an adjacent courtyard of the building, a foul and dismal place where some men are shut up close in small cells like ovens, and where others look through bars and beg, where some are playing draughts and some are talking to their friends, who smoke the while to purify the air, and some are buying wine and fruit of women vendors, and all are squalid, dirty, and vile. To look at, they are merry enough, signor, says the jailer. They are all blood-stained here, he adds, indicating with his hand 3/4 of the whole building. Before the hour is out, an old man, 80 years of age, quarreling over a bargain with a young girl of 17, stabs her dead in the marketplace full of bright flowers, and is brought in prisoner to swell the number. Among the 4 old bridges that span the river, the Ponte Vecchio, that bridge which is covered with the shops of jewelers and goldsmiths, is a most enchanting feature in the scene. The space of one house in the center being left open, the view beyond is shown as in a frame, and that precious glimpse of sky and water and rich buildings, shining so quietly among the huddled roofs and gables on the bridge, is exquisite. Above it, the gallery of the Grand Duke crosses the river. It was built to connect the 2 great palaces by a secret passage, and it takes its jealous course among the streets and houses, with true despotism, going where it lists and spurning every obstacle away before it. The Grand Duke has a worthier secret passage through the streets, in his black robe and hood, as a member of the Compagnia della Misericordia, which brotherhood includes all ranks of men. If an accident take place, their office is to raise the sufferer and bear him tenderly to the hospital. If a fire break out, it is one of their functions to repair to the spot and render their assistance and protection. It is also among their commonest offices to attend and console the sick, and they neither receive money, nor eat, nor drink in any house they visit for this purpose. Those who are on duty for the time are all called together on a moment's notice by the tolling of the great bell of the tower, and it is said that the Grand Duke has been seen, at this sound, to rise from his seat at table and quietly withdraw to attend the summons. In this other large piazza, where an irregular kind of market is held, and stores of old iron and other small merchandise are set out on stalls, or scattered on the pavement, are grouped together. The cathedral with its great dome, the beautiful Italian Gothic tower, the campanile, and the baptistry with its wrought bronze doors. And here, a small untrodden square in the pavement, is the stone of Dante, where, so runs the story, he was used to bring his stool and sit in contemplation. I wonder, was he ever, in his bitter exile, withheld from cursing the very stones in the streets of Florence the ungrateful, by any kind remembrance of this old musing place, and its association with gentle thoughts of little Beatrice. The Chapel of the Medici, the Good and Bad Angels of Florence. The Church of Santa Croce, where Michelangelo lies buried, and where every stone in the cloisters is eloquent on great men's deaths. Innumerable churches, often masses of unfinished heavy brickwork externally, but solemn and serene within, arrest our lingering steps in strolling through the city. In keeping with the tombs among the cloisters is the Museum of Natural History, famous through the world for its preparations in wax, beginning with models of leaves, seeds, plants, inferior animals, and gradually ascending, through separate organs of the human frame, up to the whole structure of that wonderful creation, exquisitely presented, as in recent death. Few admonitions of our frail mortality can be more solemn and more sad, or strike so home upon the heart, as the counterfeits of youth and beauty that are lying there, upon their beds, in their last sleep. Beyond the walls, the whole sweet valley of the Arno, the convent at Fiesole, the Tower of Galileo, Boccaccio's house, old villas and retreats. Innumerable spots of interest, all glowing in a landscape of surpassing beauty steeped in the richest light, are spread before us. Returning from so much brightness, how solemn and how grand the streets again, with their great, dark, mournful palaces and many legends, not of siege and war and might and iron hand alone, but of the triumphant growth of peaceful arts and sciences. What light is shed upon the world at this day, from amidst these rugged palaces of Florence? Here, open to all comers in their beautiful and calm retreats, the ancient sculptors are immortal, side by side with Michelangelo, Canova, Titian, Rembrandt, Raphael, poets, historians, philosophers, those illustrious men of history, beside whom its crowned heads and harnessed warriors show so poor and small, and are so soon forgotten. Here, the imperishable part of noble minds survives, placid and equal, when strongholds of assault and defense are overthrown, when the tyranny of the many, or the few, or both, is but a tale, when pride and power are so much cloistered dust. The fire within the stern streets, and among the massive palaces and towers, kindled by rays from heaven, is still burning brightly, when the flickering of war is extinguished and the household fires of generations have decayed. As thousands upon thousands of faces, rigid with the strife and passion of the hour, have faded out of the old squares and public haunts, while the nameless Florentine lady, preserved from oblivion by a painter's hand, yet lives on in enduring grace and youth. Let us look back on Florence while we may, and when its shining dome is seen no more, go traveling through cheerful Tuscany with a bright remembrance of it. For Italy will be the fairer for the recollection, the summertime being come, and Genoa and Milan and the Lake of Como lying far behind us, and we resting at Fado, a Swiss village near the awful rocks and mountains, the everlasting snows and roaring cataracts of the great Saint Gothard, hearing the Italian tongue for the last time on this journey. Let us part from Italy with all its miseries and wrongs affectionately, in our admiration of the beauties, natural and artificial, of which it is full to overflowing, and in our tenderness towards a people, naturally well-disposed and patient and sweet-tempered. Years of neglect, oppression, and misrule have been at work, to change their nature and reduce their spirit. Miserable jealousies, fomented by petty princes to whom union was destruction, and division strength have been a canker at their root of nationality, and have barbarized their language. But the good that was in them ever is in them yet, and a noble people may be, one day, raised up. From these ashes, let us entertain that hope, and let us not remember Italy the less regardfully, because, in every fragment of her fallen temples and every stone of her deserted palaces and prisons, she helps to inculcate the lesson that the wheel of time is rolling for an end, and that the world is, in all great essentials, better, gentler, more forbearing, and more hopeful as it rolls. The End. Printed by William Clowes and Sons, Limited, London and Beccles.